This week, Pallas Athena goes into retrograde, and the asteroids can be really interesting to how we make rules in our life. Pallas Athena going retrograde will influence those rules. And one of the oils that Adam's interested in using is lavender to combat those different issues. And I'm interested to know why. Adam, Pallas Athena retrograde.
Yeah, really interesting. If you think about modern, traditional astrology, I guess you should say, when you look at the lineup of planets, you've basically got only two representations of feminine. You've got the moon, which represents the mother, and you've got Venus, which represents the lover. And so that's basically saying the only thing that women are good for are being mothers and lovers. And we know that is not true. So as women have become more empowered and as astrology has evolved throughout that time, we've actually recognized that there are other significant bodies in our solar system between Mars and Jupiter. So actually quite close to us really in the big scale of the solar system, there's an asteroid belt. And the four biggest asteroids are named after four major goddesses: Juno, Ceres, Vesta, and the fourth one is Pallas Athena, named after the goddess Athena. And she is going into retrograde this week. So first of all, before I dive into the astrology of it, what are some of the basic things you know about Athena, Liz?
I knew you were going to ask that because I was just like, my brain's gone blank. And I don't really view a person necessarily as the same person, but let's go. So, Athena is a warrior goddess, right? And not in the same way that Mars or Eris is war. He's like brute force. She is strategic and wisdom. And I think that when she goes retrograde, the sense that I have is that I'm not so great at strategies anymore, that I lose that kind of grip on things. And I remember that she gained her name, or she took on the name Pallas Athena because of a friend that she'd had a fight with, and it had all gone wrong, and the friend had died. And so also Pallas Athena influences like what you learn from things and how you remember them and how you develop your thinking from that. Um, Athena is also goddess of weaving. Lots of my Melissa work deals with her on that side. Tell me, what would you say?
Yeah, and what's really interesting is not always, especially in dwarf planet astrology, that the mythology matches exactly with the asteroid or the astrology, but you do find this really strongly with Pallas Athena. So, whereas Mars, as you referred to before, in a chart, whether that be our birth chart or we're looking at where Mars is at a certain time of day or the year, then Mars is about your drive, your motivation. It's also very sexual and animalistic in that way. But like you said, Pallas Athena was the goddess of war, but it was almost as though warfare was her last choice, not her first choice. And she was more of a tactician. So what we find is that there's a bit more head in there. You know, Mars, you'd kind of think as a god, didn't really think about whether it was a good idea to go to war. He just did. He just did it, kind of thing. Whereas Athena would kind of go, is this the wisest thing? How do I make sure I win? And possibly, how could we make a win-win situation? And so when you look up Pallas Athena in your chart, and there are some great websites where if you just do an internet search of what is my Pallas Athena sign, and it'll be like Aries or Taurus or Gemini and so on, you can actually start to learn about how you deal with conflict, whether you are straight on and direct about it, or whether you kind of dance around it, or maybe if you even avoid it. So that can help us to get to know a little bit more about ourselves. When anything goes into retrograde, its energy is pulled away from the earth. Things will happen where we start to contemplate. Am I doing the right thing? And that's exactly what will happen with Pallas Athena this week. This is a time where there may be conflicts or things aren't flowing as nicely as possible, where you don't feel like you're winning as much. And so, what you're encouraged to do is to take a seat, think about your approach. And is this approach that I've been using working well? Or is there a need for a different approach or a more diplomatic approach in different aspects of your life? So lavender is really great in this context because lavender, it encourages you to slow down, to contemplate, to think. We think about it as being a sleep oil. but we've talked about in previous videos about it, how it's very nurturing. It's great for just connecting with the Divine Mother, Mother Mary, the Divine Feminine, and Kuan Yin. And although we may not think of Pallas Athena as being such a gentle goddess, she's more assertive in her way about, her retrograde energy is a time of contemplation, for not going to war. This is not a time to act, especially if something is not working out. The period while this asteroid is in retrograde is a time to think about what is the best plan, go back to the drawing board, whether that be like doing renovations on a house, trying to get a promotion, trying to get a loan, all these type of things. This is not a time to go forward. It's time to sit with your lavender, contemplate, create a bit of stillness, and allow that divine inspiration and your own intellect and intuition to guide you now.
I think that's genius, actually. If we were thought about how lavender actually works on the brain waves, it does exactly that. It says, right, turn off the beta waves. Those are the ones that go, right, act now. And it turns on alpha waves to a lesser degree, but then delta waves, and those are the ones that say sit still, think, contemplate. I think it's an excellent recommendation. And as you say, like, I think it's a really interesting thing as you start to understand what astrology is about in different ways. I really like medical astrology, but please don't ask me to talk about it here because I just would not have the mindset to do it. But being able to look and go, right, strategically, how am I working with the energies of the universe? There will be other times that I can win this battle, but now if I sit down and go with the energy of actually absorbing Athena Pallas being in direct energy to us, her energy is to say, think it through, build new tactics, build more, because then you're better armed for when the planets move and it's time to actually do something. You've done all the research, you've done all the thinking, you've reasoned out all of the arguments, and the energy of the universe is with you to say, right, okay, onwards. I always think it's really interesting when you look at the Greek myths that Athena doesn't really have relationships with females. There's like a myth involved with the olive tree, which we can talk about another time, but because Athens decided that the best gift that the gods had given them was the olive tree rather than Poseidon's spring. Poseidon was so annoyed. They said, well, yes, but so then the olive tree becomes her symbol. But to be able to have that accepted, the women had to give up the right to vote. And when you look at the myths like the Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, it's Athena is talking to the men because it's the men that are outside doing the stuff, right? And so it's strangely, it's a masculine energy, even though it's a feminine person. And I think that is quite an interesting thing, that you start to strategize you kind of go into a masculine mental way of thinking. The feminine is yin, and it's passive, and it's creative, and it's receptive, whereas men is logical, which is so sexist but actually true. It's different side of the brain, and she seems to move your thinking into that logical side of thinking. It's really interesting. I like your argument.
In other videos, we've talked about how great lavender is for sleep, but can we use lavender during the day?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I do. And you should, if somebody's suffering from anxiety or nervous, or, there's varying degrees of anxiety and worry, or, you are just stressed. I mean, I used to work in recruitment. My body would just be rigid all of the time because it was like, what have you got to do next? Oh God, I should have done that 5 minutes ago. You're just chasing. You need to be able to say to the body, stop, just calm, because even when you're in a very stressed state, well, especially when you're in a stressed state, even if you're working fast, is what I mean, if you can relax your brain, you'll still be more productive, right? Being fast doesn't necessarily mean organized, rushing and panicking and stuff your brain. So if you can use a little bit And by that I mean a small dilution of lavender for not very long, just to calm down, perhaps rub some on the back of your neck at lunchtime in a lunch break. Not enough that you're going to be dozing. Don't have a great big lunch before, because otherwise you sleep at your desk. But, just and breathe, refresh, carry on. Yeah.
No, I 100% agree with you. And I wanted to kind of bring that up because I think during this period, you may want to work with lavender throughout the day, whether it just be that little touch up at work. But if you do have some time where things aren't working out for you as well as they normally do, and you're kind of being forced to reconsider your tactics, and that can tend to happen around Pallas Athena retrogrades, sit with your lavender, diffuse it around your home. I would even dilute it. We can dilute it with many different carrier oils, but you might want to dilute it with olive oil, considering the connection between Athena and olives as well. But give yourself space. And on my social media, my Instagram and my Facebook, and my newsletter that you can subscribe to my website, adambarralet.com, I'll be giving you just different questions and journal prompts and meditations to kind of explore. And I think using lavender during this time would be a really, really beautiful complement for that as well. So now you know what's happening astrologically. Just like when you know it's going to rain, you pack an umbrella. This week with Pallas Athena, you know you need to pack your lavender. Now, one thing you might need to do a bit of a reevaluation on is what you're going to do about money, because it's one of those things that's always causes trouble for many of us. And in our next video, we're going to talk a little bit about how lavender could help you with financial abundance. Until then, take care and blessed be.